Welcome back to Not a Noise, the channel where we explore the world as it actually is, not as you might expect it to be. Today, we are going on a journey across 6 continents to visit 10 places that frankly should not exist. Places that look like they belong on another planet. Places where science had to work hard just to explain what was happening. Places where the Earth went completely off script. These are not tourist traps. These are not internet myths. Every single location in today's video is real, verified, and absolutely extraordinary. So settle in, because we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's begin. Imagine standing at the edge of a hole in the ground roughly the size of a football field. Now imagine that hole has been on fire, continuously, without stopping, for over 50 years. Welcome to the Darvaza gas crater located deep inside the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, Central Asia. Locally, people know it simply as Garagum Yalkami, which translates to desert flame, but most visitors call it something far more dramatic: the Gate of Hell. Here is what happened. Back in the early 1970s, Soviet geologists were drilling in the desert, searching for natural gas reserves. They found what they were looking for, but not quite in the way they had hoped. Their drilling rig punctured a massive underground cavern filled with methane gas. The ground beneath the rig collapsed, swallowing most of the equipment and creating a crater roughly 70 meters across and 30 meters deep. That is about 230 feet wide and 100 feet deep for those keeping track. Now, the geologists had a problem. Raw methane was pouring out of this giant hole, and it was toxic to anyone who came near. Their solution? Set it on fire. They believed the methane would burn off within a few weeks, and then the problem would be solved. That was somewhere around 1971. The fire has not gone out since. The crater has been burning for more than 50 years. Hundreds of individual flames line the floor and rim of the pit, fed by seemingly endless reserves of natural gas beneath the Amu Darya basin. Scientists now believe the crater is connected to stores of methane so vast that it may continue burning for decades or longer. At night, the glow from the crater can be seen from miles away across the flat desert. Standing at the edge, and visitors can walk right up to it. Just 3 meters from the crumbling rim, the heat is intense, the roar of the flames is constant, and the smell of sulfur hangs thick in the air. Interestingly, Turkmenistan's government has announced plans to extinguish the crater, both for environmental reasons and to better harness the natural gas reserves below. Recent satellite data suggests the flames have already begun to reduce in intensity, so if this is on your bucket list, the clock may be ticking. The Gate of Hell, a man-made accident that became one of the most surreal sights on the surface of the Earth. If someone showed you a photograph of Socotra Island without telling you where it was taken, you might guess it was a concept art piece for a science fiction film, or perhaps a rendering of what life might look like on a distant moon of Jupiter. You would almost certainly not guess it was a real island belonging to the country of Yemen, sitting quietly in the Arabian Sea about 380 kilometers south of the Arabian Peninsula. Socotra is what scientists and naturalists call a biodiversity hotspot, but that phrase barely does it justice. The island has been geographically isolated from the rest of the world for somewhere between 6 and 20 million years. Because of that extraordinary isolation, nature here followed a completely independent path. Of the roughly 825 plant species recorded on the island, about 37% exist nowhere else on Earth. Nowhere. If they disappear from Socotra, they disappear from the planet. The most famous of these is the dragon blood tree, Dracaena cinnamomum, and it looks exactly like something a child might draw if you ask them to imagine an alien tree. Its canopy is dense and flat, shaped like a wide open umbrella. Its trunk is thick and smooth, and when you cut into the bark, it bleeds a deep crimson red resin that has been used since ancient times as medicine, dye, varnish, and even cosmetics. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all knew about this tree and traded its resin across civilizations. Today, those same dragon blood trees grow slowly, just 2 to 3 centimeters per year, and can live up to 600 years. They have evolved their umbrella shape specifically to capture moisture from the island's coastal mists, an elegant solution to a very dry environment. Beyond the dragon blood trees, Socotra is home to the desert rose, a fat, twisted succulent that produces bright pink flowers and looks like something from a fairy tale, along with hundreds of unique reptile species and land snails found nowhere else. The island was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, with protection covering about 75% of its landmass. It has sometimes been called the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean, and that comparison is well earned. What Darwin found in the Pacific, biologists are still discovering here. Socotra is a living library of evolution, one that the rest of the world has barely begun to read. In 2009, audiences around the world watched a film set on a moon called Pandora, where enormous columns of rock floated impossibly in the sky above lush, alien forest. The visual was so striking, so unlike anything people had seen, that many assumed it was entirely the product of digital imagination. It was not. The director James Cameron had found his inspiration here in the Hunan province of China, in a place called Zhangjiajie. Zhangjiajie National Forest Park is home to more than 3,000 quartzite sandstone pillars, rising vertically from the forest floor. Many of them soar over 200 meters into the air. Some reach over 1,000 meters. They do not slope gradually the way conventional mountains do. They shoot straight up, sheer and narrow, their sides draped in subtropical forest that clings to near vertical rock faces with what seems like pure stubbornness. The geology behind them stretches back 380 million years. During the Devonian period, sediment accumulated over what is now Hunan province and compressed over millions of years into thick layers of quartz sandstone, one of the hardest and most erosion-resistant rock types on Earth. As tectonic forces lifted the land, water found its way into the vertical fractures in the rock. Over millions more years, that water carved away the softer material between the fractures, slowly isolating the pillars and leaving them standing alone. The trees that now grow on top of and along the sides of the pillars are not just decoration. Their roots actively split the rock further, acting as slow geological wedges that continue reshaping the landscape today. The floating mountain effect that made Zhangjiajie world famous is a meteorological phenomenon. When mist and low cloud roll in after rain, they fill the valleys between the pillars, obscuring the forest floor entirely. The peaks rise above the cloud layer and appear, from observation platforms along the ridgeline, to float in mid-air exactly as Cameron depicted them in Avatar. In January 2010, Chinese authorities officially renamed one of the most iconic pillars from its original name, the Southern Sky Pillar, to the Avatar Hallelujah Mountain in recognition of the connection. Zhangjiajie was designated China's first national forest park in 1982 and a UNESCO Global Geopark in 2004. It is home to rare wildlife, including the Chinese giant salamander and the clouded leopard, and over 500 species of trees. Standing at the edge of the Zhangjiajie Plateau, looking out across thousands of pillars disappearing into the mist, it is genuinely difficult to convince yourself that you are still on the same planet you woke up on. There is a place in the highlands of Bolivia where the ground disappears. Not literally, but when the thin layer of water that covers the salt flats of Salar de Uyuni reflects the sky above, it becomes genuinely impossible to tell where the earth ends and the atmosphere begins. The horizon vanishes. The clouds appear both above and below you. You feel as though you are standing inside the sky itself. Salar de Uyuni is the largest salt flat in the world, covering approximately 10,582 square kilometers. That is roughly the size of Jamaica or the state of Connecticut, at an altitude of nearly 3,700 meters above sea level. The entire surface is covered in a crust of salt that in some places reaches 10 meters deep, and underneath it lies one of the most significant mineral deposits on the planet. The salt flat sits atop somewhere between 50 and 70% of the world's known lithium reserves, the same lithium that powers the batteries in electric vehicles, smartphones, and laptops. Bolivia is, in a very real sense, sitting on the future of the global energy economy. The flat itself was formed roughly 40,000 years ago, when a massive prehistoric lake called Lago Minchin dried up, leaving behind this vast, crystalline expanse. During the dry season, the surface hardens into perfect hexagonal salt tiles, a pattern created by the physics of salt crystallization. During the rainy season, a thin layer of rainwater transforms the entire surface into the world's largest natural mirror. Beyond the salt, Salar de Uyuni is home to populations of wild flamingos, native foxes, giant cacti growing on small rocky islands, and a train graveyard from Bolivia's industrial past, where rusting locomotives sit abandoned in the desert as if frozen in time. It is one of the most photographed landscapes on Earth, and somehow, the photographs never quite capture it. There is a volcano on the island of Java in Indonesia that during the day looks like almost any other active volcano. A wide crater, plumes of gas, a turquoise lake sitting in the caldera below. Impressive, certainly. Dramatic, without question, but not entirely unlike other volcanic landscapes you might have seen. Wait until nightfall. As darkness settles over Kawah Ijen, the mountain begins to glow. Not red, not orange, not the familiar color of molten rock that every volcano movie has ever shown you. The light that pours from the cracks and fissures of Kawah Ijen is electric blue, vivid, cold, and deeply unsettling, and it flows down the sides of the volcano in rivers, exactly as lava would, except that it is the wrong color entirely. Locals call it api biru, blue fire, and it is believed to be the largest blue flame area on the surface of the earth. The science is as elegant as the spectacle. Kawah Ijen sits atop one of the highest concentrations of sulfur on the planet. As volcanic heat forces sulfuric gases up through cracks in the rock at enormous pressure and temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius, those gases hit the oxygen in the open air and ignite. Sulfur burns blue. Specifically, it is the emission spectrum of excited sulfur atoms releasing energy as photons of blue-violet light. Some of that burning sulfur condenses into liquid form before it has finished combusting, and it flows down the volcanic slopes as a glowing blue river. It is not lava, it is liquid sulfur on fire. The distinction barely matters to anyone who has seen it. The blue flames can reach up to 5 meters in height and are only truly visible at night. In daylight, the sulfur still burns, but the flames are invisible against the brightness of the sky. The mountain keeps its secret until dark. Below the flames at the bottom of the crater sits one of the most extraordinary and dangerous lakes on Earth. The Kawah Ijen crater lake is turquoise and eerily beautiful, and it is filled with sulfuric acid so concentrated that its pH has been measured as low as 0.5, comparable to battery acid. It is the largest, highly acidic volcanic crater lake in the world. Despite all of this, sulfur miners have worked on the slopes of Kawah Ijen for generations, descending into the crater before dawn each day, breathing through cloth masks and carrying loads of solid sulfur, sometimes exceeding 70 kilograms, up the steep crater walls on their shoulders. They do this in an environment that, by any reasonable measure, should not sustain human presence. Kawah Ijen is a place where fire is the wrong color, water is acid, and people go to work anyway. The word Pamukkale comes from Turkish and it means cotton castle. The name makes perfect sense the moment you see it. From a distance, the hillside in southwestern Turkey appears to be draped in snow, brilliant white terraces cascading down the slope like a frozen waterfall. Up close, you realize that none of it is snow or ice. It is mineral-rich water, and the terraces are made entirely of a white sedimentary rock called travertine. Pamukkale sits above a series of 17 hot springs, each one loaded with calcium carbonate. As the mineral-rich water flows out of the springs and down the hillside, it gradually deposits calcium carbonate on every surface it touches. Over thousands of years, those deposits build up into the terrace pools that you see today. Wide, shallow basins filled with pale blue water, edged with white mineral formations that look like coral or cotton, depending on the light. The springs have been known to humans for at least 2,000 years. The ancient city of Hierapolis was built at the top of the thermal springs around 190 BC, and for centuries it served as a spa city. People came from across the ancient world to bathe in the warm, mineral-rich waters, which were believed to have healing properties. The ruins of Hierapolis, including a vast necropolis and a large Roman theater that could seat 15,000 people, still sit above the terraces today. The water temperature at the springs is around 35 degrees Celsius, warm enough to be genuinely comfortable, and the calcium carbonate deposits are still forming. Pamukkale is a geological process that is still actively happening in real time, in a place where people have been watching it unfold for 2 millennia. In 1988, Pamukkale and the ruins of Hierapolis were jointly designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, the terraces are carefully managed to preserve the mineral formations. Visitors walk barefoot across sections of the site, and the water flow is periodically redirected to allow the travertine to keep growing. It is simultaneously a geological wonder, an archaeological site, and a working natural spa. There is truly nowhere else quite like it. On the island of Bohol in the central Philippines, there are hills, about 1,268 of them, spread across an area of roughly 50 square kilometers. On their own, hills are not unusual, but these hills are, because they are almost perfectly symmetrical, almost perfectly cone-shaped, and they appear in such large numbers, arranged so evenly across the landscape that they look less like a natural geological feature and more like someone reached down and pressed the same round stamp into the earth over 1,000 times. They are known as the Chocolate Hills, a name that comes from their appearance during the dry season, when the grass covering them turns brown, giving the entire landscape the look of hundreds of chocolate bonbons arranged across a tray. During the wet season, they are a lush, vivid green. The hills range in height from about 30 to 50 meters, and they are remarkably consistent in shape, which is part of what makes them so striking. UNESCO, which included them in its list of natural heritage sites, has concluded that the Chocolate Hills formed from coral deposits and rainwater erosion over millions of years. The entire region was once a shallow seabed, and the hills are the remnants of a limestone karst landscape, gradually sculpted by water into these smooth, regular mounds. Local legend, as you might expect, tells it differently. One story says the hills were formed from the tears of a giant who fell in love with a mortal woman and wept for her after she died. Another says 2 feuding giants hurled rocks and sand at each other for days, and what remained after their battle became the hills. Science and folklore sometimes arrive at the same place from very different directions. The Chocolate Hills are unusual enough that both explanations, the rational and the mythological, feel in their own way almost equally inadequate. In the far northwest corner of Poland, near the town of Gryfino, there is a small grove of pine trees, about 400 of them. Every single one of them is bent. Not a gentle lean in one direction, a dramatic, uniform curve at the base of each trunk, bending the tree sharply northward before the trunk straightens again and grows upward toward the sky. The result is a J-shaped curve at the foot of every tree, as though some enormous force grabbed each one at ground level and pushed it sideways before releasing it. This is the Crooked Forest, Krzywy Las in Polish, and it is one of the most visually arresting natural mysteries in the world. The trees were planted sometime in the 1930s, which means they were saplings when World War II broke out and disrupted the region entirely. Whatever caused the bending happened during the first few years of their growth. After that, each tree straightened up and grew normally. The curve is always in the same direction. The curve is always at the same height, and the trees were almost certainly shaped by human hands, though no one today knows exactly how or why. The most widely accepted theory is that local craftsmen deliberately bent the young trees using a technique designed to produce naturally curved wood, useful for building boat hulls, furniture, or the curved structural beams used in certain types of construction. The war interrupted whatever the project was. The craftsmen never returned, and the trees were left to grow on their own, permanently shaped by a process whose purpose was never recorded. Other theories exist, of course. Some suggest heavy snowfall pushed the young saplings over. Some point to a supposedly unusual gravitational field in the area. But none of the alternatives fully explain the consistency of the bend. Always the same angle, always the same direction, always the same height from the ground. The Crooked Forest is a reminder that the most enduring mysteries are not always the oldest ones. Sometimes a grove of trees planted less than 100 years ago can leave a question that nobody, so far, has been able to fully answer. Along the dramatic north coast of Northern Ireland, where the cliffs meet the sea in a landscape that feels ancient beyond measure, there is a path made of stone. Not just any stone, about 40,000 interlocking columns of basalt, each one hexagonal, six-sided, fitting together so precisely that there are no gaps between them. They rise from the sea, stack up along the shoreline, and extend in some places several hundred meters along the coast. Some columns are as tall as 12 meters. They look, unmistakably, like they were built. They were not. The Giant's Causeway is entirely natural, formed approximately 60 million years ago during an intense period of volcanic activity, when highly fluid, molten lava was rapidly extruded and then cooled. As the lava solidified, it contracted, and the internal stresses of contraction caused it to fracture, with extraordinary regularity, into those hexagonal columns. The same process that creates mud cracks when a riverbed dries out, scaled up by about 60 million years. The science is clear, but legend, as it always does, tells a better story. According to Irish mythology, the causeway was built by a giant named Finn McCool, who wanted to cross the sea to Scotland and fight his rival, a Scottish giant named Benandonere. Finn built the causeway column by column across the channel. In some versions of the story, when Finn saw the size of his opponent approaching, he hid, and his clever wife disguised him as a baby. Benandonere, terrified of how large the baby was and therefore how enormous the father must be, fled back to Scotland and tore up the causeway behind him. The Giant's Causeway was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. It is one of the most visited natural attractions in the United Kingdom, and it remains one of the most photographed coastal landscapes in the world. Whether you prefer the geological explanation or the mythological one, the sight of those 40,000 columns is, in both cases, equally astonishing. We end our journey in Turkey, and not just anywhere in Turkey, but in a region of central Anatolia that has been described repeatedly and by many different people as the most otherworldly landscape on the surface of the planet, Cappadocia. The landscape here was created by millions of years of geological activity. Ancient volcanoes deposited deep layers of soft volcanic rock, primarily tuff, across the region. Wind, rain, and erosion then went to work, slowly carving the soft rock into the formations that exist today, tall, narrow columns of stone that taper toward the top, their peaks capped by harder rock that resisted erosion while everything around it wore away. These formations are called hoodoos, or more memorably, fairy chimneys. They stand scattered across valleys and hillsides in their thousands, ranging from a few meters to well over 40 meters in height. In certain valleys, they are so numerous and so closely packed that walking among them feels like moving through a forest made of stone. But the geology is only the beginning of what makes Cappadocia extraordinary. Beginning in the first millennium AD, the early Christian communities of this region discovered that the soft volcanic rock was not only easy to carve, it was easy to live in. They excavated entire homes, churches, monasteries, and stables directly into the rock faces and fairy chimneys, creating a cave-dwelling civilization of remarkable scale and sophistication. The churches they carved contained frescoes that survive to this day, painted directly onto volcanic rock walls over 1,000 years ago. Below ground, the complexity only deepens. The region is home to dozens of underground cities. The largest, Derinkuyu, descends at least 18 levels below the surface and could shelter tens of thousands of people during times of conflict. It had ventilation shafts, water wells, storage rooms, chapels, and even stables, all carved by hand from the rock over centuries. Today, Cappadocia is perhaps best known internationally for the spectacle of hot air balloons drifting over the fairy chimneys at sunrise. Hundreds of them at times, floating silently above a landscape that looks, from above, like nothing so much as another world. It is, in every sense, a fitting place to end this journey. 10 places, 6 continents, one extraordinary planet, from a fire that has burned for half a century in the middle of a Central Asian desert to an island in the Indian Ocean where trees bleed red, and evolution never stopped experimenting. From thousands of towering sandstone pillars in China that inspired a Hollywood vision of another world, to a salt flat in Bolivia that becomes a mirror for the sky. From a volcano in Indonesia where fire burns electric blue and the crater lake is filled with acid, to terraced pools of turquoise water cascading down a hillside in Turkey. From perfectly shaped hills in the Philippines that defeated every simple explanation, to a pine grove in Poland that holds a secret no one has yet been able to fully decode. From an ancient volcanic path in Northern Ireland that inspired one of the great mythological traditions of Europe, to an underground civilization in Cappadocia built inside volcanic rock 10 centuries ago and still standing today. The world is, without question, stranger than any of us expect. And that, if anything, is worth celebrating. If you enjoyed today's video, consider sharing it with someone who needs reminding that reality is more interesting than anything we could invent. Subscribe to Not a Noise for more explorations just like this one. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.